Hello, welcome to Economics Exam 1 review. Um, Basically, I'm going to be using the study guide. It's the red one under Chapter 1. This study guide is amazing. Um, I didn't make it up. I used to give review sessions, and I had a student, I stopped giving them because no one showed up to them. Anyway, I had a student who showed up, and she took notes and then combined them with her own personal notes. And she typed it up. She was very type A. And she made this review sheet for the first exam. I saw it. I asked her for it, and she gave it to me. So review this. Anything we don't cover, make sure you look at this. I'm just guessing. I don't look at this. I don't make the exam up off of this. But roughly 80 to 90% of the stuff that's on any exam is directly on here, maybe even more. So I recommend studying this before you take the exam. But we're going to go over a lot of it. And it's not completely in order by chapters, so we're going to move around a little bit. But here we're going to start right here. Now, macro typically exam covers chapters 1 through 3, and micro covers 1 through 4. So if you're watching the macro, when we get to chapter 4 stuff, you're welcome to stop the video. You're not required to watch it or take questions or anything, but you might want to watch it anyway just to get to chapter 4 stuff. So we're going to start here on the second page. And some of the things you want to make sure you know are those definitions that that I gave in class. And the first one is science, and that is the discovery of things, their natures, and the relationships between things. That comes to us from St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay. And the next thing, we'll just go straight to it, is logic. The mind's ability to compare or contrast things. Are they alike or different? Okay. We'll get the correct spelling there. Then we have economics. It's a science that deals with the relationship between scarce means that have alternative uses, including time and one's own physical body and ends. Now, that is Robbins' definition. Okay. And we're going to add this in here. Mises adds that its ends and means relationships that involve economic calculation. Okay, oftentimes on the exams, I'll just give you Robbins' definition, and that'll be good enough just because it complicates things. But Mises is actually correct here in that economics is a science that deals with the relationship between scarce means that have alternative uses, including time and one's own physical body, and ends that involve economic calculation, profit and loss. We can monetize the benefits of our actions in the form of revenues, and we can monetize the opportunity cost of our actions in terms of costs that are paid to by the factors of production to produce a good or a service. Okay, and then we have the truth, and we're going to go over here when we get to the truth. And this comes from On Epistemology by Father John J. Toohey. Toohey says that there's 3 different ways we use this word truth. The first one is an ontological truth, and that is something that is true independent of our minds knowing it. It's true whether or not we know it or not. Okay, and these are the things that we want to find out in the real world. Okay, then we have what is called a logical truth. A logical truth exists when what you assent to is identical with reality. Okay, they're the same. And we talked about circles and men and women and things like that in class. Okay, so it is a logical truth when what we assent to is identical with reality. And finally, we have what we call a moral truth. And a moral truth is when what you say is identical with what you assent to. Now, something can be a moral truth and not a logical truth. So, for example, I could say that, oh, I could say that the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu. Okay. Now, if I assent to that, then it is a moral truth because I've told you what I assent to. But it could be an ontological truth that the coronavirus is not more contagious than the flu. In that case, what I said, that the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu, is a moral truth, but what I assent to in my mind is not a logical truth, because we said that the ontological truth might be that it's not as contagious as the flu. Okay? And you've got to remember that. Now, when things go right, all three of these things kind of hold. Something's an ontological truth, we assent to it, and then we tell you what we assent to. Okay. Now, economics deals with scarcity. That is the condition in which wants are forever greater than the available supply of time, goods, and resources. There are always more wants than there are means to satisfy those wants. Our wants are virtually unlimited, while means are limited. So we are always in a world of scarcity. Okay? We live in a world of scarcity, and there is nothing that we can do to change that. Now, the next thing we're looking at here, these are the definitions that go with Kant's box. There is a video on Kant's box. I copied it from chapter 1 into the review folder. If you haven't already watched that, I recommend that you watch it. I'm not going to go into this stuff in excruciating detail, but we're talking about epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. What we know, what we don't know, what it means to know something, what types of things can we know, what types of things can't we know. Now, the things that we come to know are called propositions. So, for example, the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu. That is a proposition. Okay? That is a proposition. Now, in order to know something, it must be true. Okay? In this case, it must be an ontological truth. Okay? That it exists, that it is true. Okay? That in the real world, the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu. If that's not true, we can't know it. Okay, so the proposition has to be true. Number two, you must assent to it. So let's say that I did not assent to the fact that the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu. If I don't believe it, if I don't give myself to it, that's what the word assent means here. I give myself to it. The chair that you're sitting on in. When you sat down, you assented to the fact that there was a chair underneath you, or you wouldn't have done it. Okay, you gave yourself to it. You acted on it. You sat on it. Okay. Now, if I did not believe that the coronavirus was more contagious than the flu, then I could not know it. Okay, I have to believe it. I have to assent to it. And finally, in order to know if something is true, you have to have a good reason. Okay, you can't just say, oh, I've got a corn on my pinky toe that acts up whenever something's true, so I accept or I assent to every proposition that comes along when my pinky toe acts up. Okay, that's probably not a good reason. So what is a good reason? So in order to know something, it has to be true. You have to assent to it. You have to give yourself to it, believe it. And finally, you have to assent for a good reason. Now, the propositions that we come to know, different propositions have different good reasons for assenting to them. And each proposition gets a two-word name. And its first name is either analytic or synthetic. That deals with the relationship between that proposition and logic. Analytic propositions are propositions in which logic is sufficient in order to determine if they're true or false. Logic and logic alone can tell you if it's true or false. Synthetic propositions are those in which the means of formal logic are necessary but not sufficient to determine if they're true or false. So in other words, you need logic, but logic is not enough. You need something else. So that's the first name that a proposition gets, and they only get two first names. They're either analytic or synthetic. There's nothing else. The last name that a proposition gets refers to the relationship between that proposition and observation. Observation, the five senses, see, smell, hear, taste, touch, or a sixth way, you can get on reliable authority from someone who did see, smell, hear, taste, or touch it. Okay? If I were to ask you who won World War II, you would all say that the Allies won World War II. None of us were there to see the victory, but we get it on reliable authority from other people who were there and told us that the Allies won World War II. Now, that last name deals with the relationship between that proposition and observation. A priori propositions, you could think of those as propositions you could know are true before you observe anything. Those are propositions in which observation is not necessary. You do not have to see, smell, hear, taste, or touch. Hear, smell, see, taste, touch, or get on reliable authority from someone who did to know that they're not true or that they are true. Okay? That word prior is there. That's how I remember it. I could know it prior to observing it. A posteriori as your after end, right? A posteriori propositions, you could think of those as propositions you can't know until after you observe it. Okay, the official definition is that a posteriori propositions are those in which observation is necessary in order to determine if they're true or false. You do need to observe them or get on reliable authority from someone who did. So that's the last name that a proposition gets. Now, we put these together in Kant's box. I'm not going to go over it in detail. I already have a video here in this folder for it. But we have four different types of possible propositions that we could know. All potential human knowledge is in this box. Everything that we could possibly know is in this box. And the box is divided into four sections. At the top, we have the first name that a proposition gets, and that becomes our columns. So all of the propositions in this column here are analytic propositions. All of the propositions in this column here are synthetic. Then the second name that a proposition gets goes into these rows. The first type of the second type, let me see, the first type of proposition we have up here is a priori. Observations not necessary. So everything in this row is an a priori proposition. So we have analytic a priori propositions. Those are terms, definitions, and equations in which logic is sufficient and you do not need to observe them. Then we have a priori synthetic propositions, and those things are things that we need logic, but it's not enough, and you don't need observation. So the question is, what do you need? And the answer here is introspection. Immanuel Kant said that we could learn these things through introspection and looking at a proposition and seeing if it is possible that this thing could be false. Okay? If it's not possible that this thing could be false, then we cannot refute that proposition without using it. And that is called a performative contradiction, using something to refute its own existence. Okay? That can't be true. I can't say there are no axioms. Well, I use an axiom to assert this. And the proposition there are no axioms has to be an axiom if it's true. So some philosophers accept them and some don't. I don't know why they don't, but they don't. The next row we have here is the a posteriori row. These are propositions in which observation is necessary. Now there is a box here in this first, X here in this first box, the analytic a posteriori proposition. These would be propositions in which logic is sufficient in order to determine if they're true or false, and observation is necessary. That doesn't make sense. If logic is sufficient, we do not need anything else to know if they're true. That's a contradiction. So nothing goes in this box. This final box here is the synthetic a posteriori proposition. And the things that go in that box, logic is necessary but not sufficient in order to determine if it's true or false. And observation is necessary. So you need logic and observation. The things that go in that box we call sense data. And these philosophers say these things are time and space dependent. Okay, they're true at certain times and in certain places, but they don't have to be true at other times and in other places. So, example, right now we could say you're watching a video in my for my class, but that doesn't mean that you always watch videos from my class or that you're watching videos from my class somewhere else, like in Jupiter. Okay, here and now, it's true you're watching these things, but in the future, you may never watch another video from my class, and you're not watching these videos for my class in other places, only in one place and at one time. Now, depending upon how many of these things you think we can come to know, that determines what you think science is and the method or proper method for science. Okay? Positivism says that there are analytic a priori propositions, so we're going to highlight those. And I'm going to put it in red here. I'm going to color it in red. Okay. Yeah, that's not good. Red's too dark. There we go. Lighter red there. Okay, so those are the terms, definitions, and equations that we then use as theory. Now, philosophers say that the things in this box are non-operational. They don't tell us anything new or interesting about the real world. They're tautologies, so that is something that is true by definition. It's true because I defined it that way. Okay, so in and of itself, theory from this analytic a priori box, those terms, definitions, and equations, that theory doesn't tell us anything about the real world. Okay, we use these assumptions, use logic to come to a testable hypothesis, which we then test against sense data. We'll color that box in green. Okay, so here, this is where you get your theory if you're a positivist, and you test it against this sense data. And if your sense data matches your hypothesis, you fail to reject your theory. If it contradicts your hypothesis, you reject the theory and you go and you develop a new one. Now, the positivists deny the existence of axioms. They say that there are no axioms, period. Of course, that is an axiom itself and involves them in a performative contradiction, but they're okay with that. The praxeological school, used by the Austrians in economics, this positivist method, the red and the green, those are used by mainstream economists or positivists. They say, no, there are axioms and that we do, in fact, know some. So I'm going to put this in blue. To the praxeological economists, and the Austrians are the greatest example of this, they believe that there are certain propositions which are universally true and are irrefutably true. They can't be false. Things like the human action axiom, that all men must act. In acting, they use scarce resources, including time and one's own physical body, through a perceived causality to accomplish given ends. That labor implies disutility. That each additional unit of a homogeneous good, all other things being equal, is less valuable than prior units because each additional unit of the good goes towards satisfying a less important good than the one before it. That these things are universally true, or what we would call irrefutable or non-controversial empirical truths, and that those can be the basis or the premises for a theory. If you use axioms as your premises, and that makes those premises true, logic doesn't change anything in your premises, it just rearranges them. And you use logic to come to a conclusion. If your premises are all true, your logic is correct, then your conclusion or your theory is true. And if it's true, it doesn't need to be tested. Okay? So the scientific method tests a theory using sense data, but that's because the propositions in that theory aren't true, or we don't know them to be true. So we have to test it. And we continually test and retest it without ever proving that it's true. A theory that is based in axioms and proper logic is true and doesn't require testing. So the praxeological method does not require testing. You look at the propositions, if they're true and there's no logical errors, then the conclusion or the theory is true and it doesn't have to be tested. Instead, we can spend our time applying it to the real world to explain it and understand it. On the other hand, if we don't have axioms, then all the propositions we have are problematic or false propositions to use. And they come out of this box rather than the blue one, these analytic a priori propositions, and they're non-operational. They're useless to us in the real world. And then we perform experiments to test the hypothesis derived from those theories and see if it matches. And if it matches, we keep it. If it contradicts the hypothesis, we throw the theory away. But we never prove anything using that scientific method. There we go here. Now, your book talks about economic models. Typically, these theories here come from equations where we define the terms and we use math to come up with a testable hypothesis. That would be an economic model. And that is a simplified description of reality used to understand and predict the relationships between variables, say between the price of a good and the quantity that is demanded by consumers. That would be positive economics to a mainstream economist, to a positivist, an analysis limited to statements that are verifiable in fact. Normative economics, on the other hand, is an analysis based on value judgments. So, for example, if we were to say, I think it's bad or good that the amount of a good or service people are willing and able to purchase, quantity demanded, is determined by price, then that would be normative economics. We're using value judgments. Okay. Now, from chapter 2, we talked about categories of resources or the factors of production. We said there are 7 things that go into making everything that you like. The first one is land. Land is any natural resource provided by nature, everything in, on, or below the surface of the land. Oil underneath the land would be an example of land. So we use that term broader as economists than we do in normal speech. It's not just the patch of dirt, it's everything in, on, or beneath it that is nature or God-given. Then we have labor. Labor is human effort directed towards the production of goods and services. This is in contrast to the only other thing you can use your time on earth for, and that is leisure, consuming. Human effort directed towards consuming goods and services. That would be leisure. Then we have capital goods, the third category. That's the physical plants, machinery, and equipment used to produce other goods. Okay. They, along with the rest of these, do not directly satisfy human wants. They're used to satisfy human wants indirectly through their production of a consumer good. A consumer good is something that you consume with your leisure, like a ham sandwich or a boat ride. Now, when we use the word capital goods here, your book just calls them capital, so we have to add that word goods to it. Then we have entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are those individuals in our society who deal with uncertainty, and they rely on judgment to forecast future human wants and needs to meet those. Excuse me. They use their judgment to decide what future human wants and needs will be, and then use the factors of production now to meet those future needs. Okay. We have business conditions. When we talk about business conditions, we talk about institutions. An institution is simply a rule, a set of rules or norms. And we have informal and, we have voluntary or societal norms. Those are rules not backed by force. And then we have governmental or coercive norms. Those are rules that are backed by force. If you break the rules, someone's going to use force against you. Okay? Time goes without saying. Technology. Technology is a plan or a recipe on how to combine these factors of production to produce a good or a service. Okay? And those 7 things constitute the factors of production. In order to produce a good or a service, we combine these 7 things using that technology to produce that good or service. Now, in chapter 2, we deal with opportunity cost, marginal and marginal analysis. Opportunity cost is the next most highly valued choice that is foregone to achieve our goal. So, for example, let's say you're reading these PowerPoint slides, or you're watching this video. Of all the things you could have possibly done at this point in time, watching this video to study for your exam is the most important. There are other things you could have done. You could have read a book. You could have gone to the movies. The next best option, let's say it's going to the movies, that would be the opportunity cost to studying these slides. By studying these slides, you can't do a bunch of other things. The best one of those would have been to go to the movies. So that's the opportunity cost. It's what you sacrifice. Okay. The next thing we have is marginal analysis, and that is how people act. We act based on the margin. The margin is the unit being added or subtracted. So you looked at the hour of time that you used watching this video, and you said, of all the things I could do with this hour of time, watch the video, watch a movie, or eat a sandwich. You evaluate which one is the best. Watching this video was your choice, and compare it against the opportunity cost or the next best use of that time, which was going to the movies. The sandwich is unimportant. You never would have done that anyway. So you look at it, you say, which one's better? You say, well, watching the videos is better because I care more about my future than I do about the enjoyment I'd get right now from watching the movie. So you make that choice and you act and you watch the video. Okay. We use something called a production possibilities frontier to demonstrate that. And that is a curve that shows the maximum combinations of two outputs that an economy can produce given its available resources and technology. So here I've got a little picture. Okay, there's 3 employees here. There's a gadget and widget making machine inside of a building, a 10-foot by 10-foot pile of wood. There is a technology. The first worker will grab a piece of wood off the pile, put it in the widget gadget making machine. The second employee will lift the lever up if they want to make a widget, push it down if they want to make a gadget, and the third employee will catch the widget or gadget as it comes out of the machine and stack it for shipping. That's my technology. I've got a fixed amount of time, 1 day. Okay, so all these 7 things up here, oops, I went too far. Land, labor, capital, goods, business conditions, technology, time, and entrepreneurship. Those things are all fixed. They're in this box and they don't change. Now, using 1 full day's worth of time, if we produce nothing but widgets, there'd be some maximum amount of widgets we could produce. And here I made that number 20. And we would not be able to produce any gadgets, 0. Okay, that becomes a point on our production possibilities frontier. We could also produce only gadgets during the day, and in that case, we could produce 10 gadgets, but we'd have 0 widgets. So gadgets on the x-axis, widgets on the y. Point A, 0 gadgets, 20 widgets. We'll call this point Z, which is 10 widgets, or excuse me, 10 gadgets and no widgets. Then we could produce various combinations in between, A, B, C, D, etc. And if we connected all those points with a line, it would produce a production possibilities frontier, in this case, a curve. We typically draw these bowed out from the origin because of the law of increasing opportunity costs. Okay. And there's instructions here on how to use it. Now we can use this to evaluate a number of things. We could use it to discuss opportunity costs. Let's say we're producing here at point A where we have no gadgets and 20 widgets. And let's say the next day we say, hey, let's produce at point B where we have 2 gadgets and 19 widgets, I'm sorry, look at point B. In order to go from A to B, we have to, in order to produce more widgets, you can see we have to produce fewer gadgets. We have to take resources away. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. We have to take resources away from widget producing. Here we used them all to produce widgets in order to produce these 2 gadgets. To do that means we're going to produce fewer widgets, only 19. So to gain 2 gadgets, the opportunity cost is the 1 widget that we have to give up. Okay. Marginal analysis, we would look at that. We would say, what's better? These 2 widgets that we get if we operate at point B, or that 20th widget we would have if we stayed at point A. Are the 2 gadgets that we gain better or worse than the widget we have to give up to get them? If the two gadgets are better, we'll move from A to B. We'd rather add two widgets than have that 20th gadget. We'd rather have two gadgets rather than that 20th widget. If, on the other hand, we said, no, the 20th widget is better than those two gadgets, we'd stay at point A. And that's called marginal analysis. We can also use this curve to discuss economic growth. And we said earlier, economic growth can, okay, she wrote is, I'm going to change that, can be caused, not is, can be caused by increases in the quantity and or quality of the real factors of production, the 7 things we mentioned that go into everything that we like. Okay. This causes or can cause a shifting out of the production possibilities frontier. We can move it out away from the origin. And now combinations of widgets and gadgets out here that were previously impossible or unattainable to us on this curve, on the new curve, those become possible. And we call that economic growth when we shift this frontier out away from the origin. This could be caused by increases in the quantity and or quality of land. Say we discover new oil resources, or we discover better ways to manage our farms so that the soil is more fertile or its fertility lasts longer. We could do this by increasing the quantity and or quality of labor. Increasing the quantity of labor is difficult. You can do it through immigration, higher birth rates, lower death rates. Or we can improve the quality of it. We typically do that through education or on-the-job training, experience, those types of things. We can increase the quantity of capital goods or the quality of them. We could develop better technologies. We could make a better environment for entrepreneurs or get better entrepreneurs. Okay, we can improve business conditions. We can't change time. All of those things could lead to economic growth. All right. Then we talked about stuff that's not in the book. And the main one was how to get rich. Okay. We said that the book does not do a good job of explaining investment. Your book says that investment is the accumulation of capital goods, such as factories, machines, and inventories that are used to produce goods and services. But they don't tell us how these things are produced. Okay. And we use a Robinson Crusoe story here to explain where capital goods or new technologies come from. And in this, we assume that Robinson has perfect knowledge of fishing. And he arrives on an island shipwrecked with nothing but the clothes on his back. He knows everything there is to know about fishing and where to get these things for every method known to man, from catching fish with your hands all the way up to catching fish with a modern fishing trawler and everything in between. And he arrives on this island with nothing but the clothes on his back. He has to find all the things he needs to survive. And we'll say that he finds a cave to live in real quickly, a freshwater stream, and a tide pool full of little fish. In order to survive, Robinson is going to have to catch fish. Now, upon arriving on the island, which method would Robinson undertake? Now, of course, he'd like to catch him with the fishing trawler, but would he? And the answer is no. Robinson would starve to death before he could ever find all of the things he needed to make the fishing trawler and assemble it. What we find out is Robinson would produce fish the most primitive way that man can, with his bare hands. Even though he knows everything there is to know about fishing, he'd still fish the same way the first human did. Okay? And that is by directly mixing his labor with nature and catching the fish by hand. Now, let's say he could catch 3 fish per day with that method. He knows if he builds a spear, he could increase his daily total of fish, or his daily output of fish, from 3 to 6. That spear is a capital good. It's a man-made factor of production. the machinery, plants, and equipment that are used to produce other goods and services. Now, in order to fish with the spear, Robinson, he knows it's going to take him one full day out in the jungle where he's going to find the stick and the point and carve it and get everything ready. It's going to take him one full day. If he's building the spear, what is he not doing? Catching fish. So in order to produce the spear, Robinson would have to catch 3 fish per day, eat the 2 necessary for him to sustain himself, and dry out the 3rd for 2 days. So he has 2 fish that he could put into his pocket and eat those while he goes out to build the spear. Now, the act of abstaining from consumption, we call that savings. Robinson produces 3 fish, but he doesn't consume the 3rd. He lets it dry and saves it. That's savings. After he's done that for 2 days, then he can invest those savings, spend them to fund a production process, in this case for a capital good, the spear. And that is how capital good accumulation occurs. Someone has to first save, invest those savings to fund the production of a capital good. Now, it's not just enough to save and invest those savings and produce capital goods. We have to produce the right ones. And that's where this final thing here on wealth creation comes. In order for wealth to be produced, what you produce must be a good. It must be demanded by someone. It must satisfy someone's human want or need. Number 2, the complementary factors of production must be present. Okay? Robinson's big problem was on the island was that while he had the technology, he knew how to make a fishing trawler, he didn't have land, labor, capital goods, and business conditions under which he could build it. So it didn't do him any good. The complementary factors of production weren't present. Number 3, the output must be worth more than the input, or what we say is the value of the output must exceed that of the opportunity cost of the resources used to produce it. Another way of saying that is that of all the things you could have produced with those resources, what you produce has to be the best one in order for wealth to be produced. Okay. Now, those 3 things don't have to be true in the present. They have to be true in the future. And that's where number 4 comes in. Proper judgment must be used regarding the future output. It isn't enough that it's a good now, that what we're producing is a good now, that the complementary factors of production are present now, that it's the best thing we could have produced with those resources according to people's taste and preferences now. Those 3 things have to be true in the future. We don't know the answers to those questions, so we have to use judgment. Judgment is how we deal with uncertainty, and that's what entrepreneurs do. So if all 4 conditions are met, then wealth can be produced. Now, the opportunity cost of investment is the consumer goods that could have been purchased or consumed with the money spent for plants and other equipment. By saving money, I say I could buy a new house, I could buy a fancy car, but instead I'm going to push that money away. I'm going to push those things away, and I'm going to give them to someone else when I invest those savings to build a factory. Okay, so if the factory doesn't work out, what I ended up losing was the house and the car and the things I could have bought with that money. Okay, and there are 4 rules for acquiring wealth. These are the just means of acquiring wealth. The first one is self-ownership. When you're born or when you're conceived, you take ownership of your body. You are the owner of your own physical body. No man can own another man. Number 2, homesteading. You can mix your labor with unowned resources. You can find an unowned piece of land, plow it, plant seeds on it, and then you own the land. And production, when those seeds grow and they produce apples, you would be the owner of those apples. And finally, the fourth just mean for acquiring wealth is voluntary exchange. Here, I take my apples and I trade them to you for cows. And maybe I trade you a bushel of apples for a cow. Okay? You wouldn't make the exchange if you didn't like the bushel of apples better than the cow you have to give up. So by making that exchange, you're better off because you have apples, which you like better than the cow. On the other hand, I'd never offer the exchange if I didn't like the cow better than the bushel of apples I'm giving up. By making the exchange, I'm better off because I like the cow better than the apples I had to give up to get it. So in that case, voluntary exchange makes both parties better off while making no one worse off. The same thing with self-ownership, homesteading, and production. None of these methods for acquiring wealth make anyone worse off. They only make one or more persons better off. Anything else like taxes, wealth redistribution, socialism, those things all require the use of force because I have to force someone to make an exchange. I have to force someone to work so that I can use the product of their labor to pay someone who didn't work. Okay? And those ways of acquiring wealth are unjust or evil. I'm going to stop this video here because it's long, and then I'll do chapter 3 and 4 separate. Thank you very much.